Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hey, Eric. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Ahmad. And I think, Rocky, we've got the slide up. Can we bring that down for the beginning?
That's me. I'll take
Oh,
it down.
thank you. Everybody, welcome. It's always good to see you, Brother Ahmad.
And you too, my friend, and everyone.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a big group on here today. I see Amy, as always, in her 14th North Valley Thrive meeting of the week so far. Good to see Jean, always dressed up. Always make me feel underdressed.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everybody.
I see Doris, who's doing her job better than I'm doing mine. It's good, man. It's like a little romper room situation we got here. Most of you are too young to know what romper room is, but it was a TV show back when people watched TV. Welcome, everybody. People are sort of coming in as they're registering, so I want to give them just a couple minutes. I hope that the beginning of the year has been good so far. We're on the cusp of like 1 month down. It feels like it's only been a couple weeks. For those of you that are a little confused, we are in 2024. We are in 2024.
Sorry, I'm off camera, but I'm here.
Thank you,
You can hear me, but
great.
Say hi briefly.
Great. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. And asking you guys to mute if you aren't already muted. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Eric Serrato, and I am the convener, project director for North Valley Thrive, which is the Northern San Joaquin Valley region of what is called California Jobs First. And most of you I've seen on dozens and dozens of these calls, so you know the backstory of our work. If you happen to be new, welcome to our coalition. Our focus over the last year and over the next several years is to better understand the needs and the opportunities of 3 counties in our state, and that's Merced County, Stanislaus County, and San Joaquin County. The state divided itself into 13 economic development regions under the California Jobs First initiative. But not all of us are built the same. Some of those regions have been working together for years and years and years, and they have institutions like Valley Vision or the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation or other entities that have been studying their region for generations. And because they've been doing the work of understanding their economy and their workforce and their population, they're kind of ahead of the game in terms of the businesses that they attract, the policy decisions that they make, and the infrastructure that exists in their region. We are just starting that process. We've never come together like this. And a real goal of our work has been to establish this new entity. A big part of that work has been the work that Dr. Pogue and his research collaborative have done. This is work that he's been doing for years and now broadening and deepening that work with the help of researchers from California State University Stanislaus and UC Merced, and just a cadre of really intelligent people that are looking at our economy and our population and our assets in a new way. Part of that work was to develop a baseline research report, which is a 500-page document that you're all going to be able to access pretty soon. But you could spend an entire week flipping through 500 pages, or you could ask for the Cliff Notes. And so this is really the Cliff Notes. We've divided that 500-page tome into 3 webinars. Each of them has a different focus. Today, we're going to be talking about sort of the demographics and sort of our region as a whole. Our second session on February 8th is going to talk about sort of our economy and jobs. And then our third webinar on the 15th is going to talk about climate, the environment, and public health. Again, this work has never been done before in this way. And I'm just so proud that we have Dr. Pogue at the helm of this work. He is going to run through his slideshow. And as you do that, you can put questions in the chat, but just know that we've put the last 10 minutes as a time to really have some conversation. We're going to be feeding up those questions to Dr. Pogue as we go, but you might want to save it for that last 10 minutes so that we can actually have some conversation. So without further delay, I will hand this over to Dr. Pogue. And thank you again for joining, and hopefully we continue to see you on the 8th and again on the 15th.
Just a quick pause. Good afternoon, everyone. Para todas las personas que necesiten interpretación en español, en el menú principal de su Zoom hay un icono en forma de mundo donde pueden ver que dice interpretación. Si presionan ahí, pueden seleccionar la opción en español. Gracias.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Definitely, and that's one of the indicators we're going to be talking about today is language inclusivity and inequalities. So very glad that we have that available for you all. And thanks for the intro, Eric. And thank you all for joining us today. I need to again thank the team, the research collaborative team, for all their work that they've done. I get to talk about all that hard work, but it was all the hours that they all put in that made this possible. And as massive as this is, it is a selection, and it is also a beginning. We recognize that each of you know aspects of this region that we weren't able to capture in this. And we want to hear as we move forward what additional information we need as a region to inform our decision-making process better. So we ask that you take this as a starting point, and that the information we put out here is to help us orient ourselves on a common ground and a basis going forward. And in addition to additional research, we're also going to be working on different ways to access this information, making some of the indicators available in an interactive way we're hoping to develop over the summer and moving forward. But for now, today, I want to focus on walking you through the beginning of the report, if you will. The first couple of sections and the primary focus of today is on the issues related to demographics and regional inequalities. You'll see this long list here, which is the portion of the report that we're going to try to orient you through. These issues over here with the asterisk are going to be in next week's conversation, where we talk about the economy, employment, and important dynamics in terms of regional and development and economic growth in the area in terms of our sectors in particular and our priority sectors. The beginning of the report actually lays out who we are in terms of our stakeholder process and our engagement. It talks about how during this part one of the research phase we engaged with the community through a variety of conversations. It includes a list of those conversations that we held, and in the appendix, it has a list of the communities that were consulted in this process. And that's all described in there very briefly, because it was a very extensive conversation and series of conversations that were involved, and more on that to come. The important component of that section was a mandate from the state to identify the disinvested communities in our region. And under California Jobs First, there's 4 criteria which a community may be considered disinvested, and that's looking at one of 2 ratings within the CalEnviroscreen 4.0 score. The overall score, if you're in some of the most polluted areas through that, or if you're in some of the most pollution burden areas, according to the Enviroscreen score, you're considered a disinvested community. AB 1550 also provides a median income basis for being considered a disinvested community. There's also high unemployment and high poverty areas that are designated by the governor's office, which are another basis. And then land controlled by federally recognized Native American tribes are the 4th criteria. And this map on the left over here is a little bit blurry. My apologies on that, but that shows you the green area, the communities that are by one of these 4 definitions considered disinvested, which gives us an idea of where we're starting. Is a vast majority of our region is disinvested according to the state's criteria under one of them. In the appendix, there are some breakdowns of the different criterias in terms of which regions are classified under those, as well as further details on the actual census tracts and communities and which ones fall under the different criteria are listed out in there for anybody that's interested. I should also mention that in this context of sort of understanding the where we're starting from and who we're working with, asset mapping is an important component, which we've begun, but it's not detailed in this report. We're working with some research partners throughout this next couple of months to get some of that asset mapping available and online, and see that as an important contribution in terms of what we'll be looking at in this aspect of the report, building out over the next couple of months to help the steering committee and to help identify our strategy development as we look at the sort of geography of developmental assets in the region. So moving into section 3, the first part of section 3 is looking at demographics and looking at where our region has gotten to in terms of size over time. An important feature, as you look over here at this table 3.1.1, is that our growth is slowing down. And this is in line with the rest of the state, although we're still growing at a much faster rate than the state as a whole. Our growth rates are slowing down, and that is not surprising, but some of the rate of decline in population growth is a little bit surprising because of how much population growth has been a key characteristic of our region through recent history. That information in terms of just what's been happening with our population, we have city growth details. We have statewide rankings of our cities. Our largest city, as many of you know, I hope, is Stockton. It's now the 11th largest city in the state. It was the 13th just a couple of years ago. But in line with the rest of the state, our region's slowing down. And so we spend some time in this demographic section looking at what are the components of population growth and what are some of the key factors that are influencing that. And one of the important components when you look at population growth is migration. And the story of our region in terms of migration has historically been a net inflow from other parts of California, of migrants from other parts of California, and a net outflow of residents from our region to other parts of the United States. And there's a lot of factors influencing that, but a basic storyline in that regard is the cost of living and affordability. And we see people moving in from more expensive coastal California, particularly the Bay Area. And we see people moving out to less expensive regions, less expensive states, because of with lower housing costs and lower costs of living. On a whole, we've historically had significant inflows of many thousands. You'll see since the COVID pandemic, this figure 3.1.3, you see during the housing crisis in 2011, 2012, and 2013, we had net domestic population outflows as job opportunities and employment was particularly hard hit by the region. More recently, we've had positive inflows, but somewhat surprisingly, given the growth of hybrid work and some of the narratives that we've been interested in recent years, it seems as though some of those net outflows have been growing. And we have some data in this part of the report talking about what evidence there is, and also some of the uncertainty that we have. It takes us a little bit of time to get good data on these net migration flows, and some of the initial data that's available from the Department of Finance, California Department of Finance, is a little uncertain in our minds about how significant some of this outflow is. So we have some questions and qualifiers around that, but the story being that these outflows are seemingly growing is important. And also another important dimension as we look at this graph, which shows also net immigration, that our immigration flows have been fairly consistent, although constrained during the pandemic, but not enough to outweigh some of those outflows in recent years. Another important part of this population story is the rate of natural change, and that's the difference between births and deaths. And in this, there's a really important story to tell in terms of the declining fertility rates that we're seeing in the North San Joaquin Valley. And that story is importantly led by the trending to a lower level of the Hispanic population's fertility rate. You see down here in the table 3.1.5 on this slide that the rate of births per 1,000 women aged 15 to 50 years old of Hispanic ethnicity has declined from 80 in the 5-year period from 2008 to 2012 to 58 in the 5-year period from 2018 to 2022. And we look at these 5-year periods because if you don't look at multi-year samples, the statistical noise in the population gets too high. But you see that in that period alone, from 2008 to 2022, there's been a 27% decline in that Hispanic fertility rate, and it's approaching the non-Hispanic, the white alone fertility rate of 49, which is also decreased down 3.5%, but obviously a lot lower. And what the literature seems to be suggesting is that there's a large shift as second generation Hispanic families have children. There's a lot lower fertility rate in them, and that's been part of the drivers of this. But again, an issue that is very important and very significant, but one that has led to these figures here in all of our counties, a lowering of the overall population rate. In the appendix, I also want to mention we have details looking over time of the total births from 1960 to 1922, and also that same information at a county level so that you can see how these trends are tracking across each of our regions. Looking at the other side of the coin in terms of fatalities, we see that on a per capita basis, our fatalities have been declining consistently up until the early 2010s. And even before the pandemic, there was a bit of a reversal. Part of that might be some of our increased age of our population, but we see the distinct spike in the pandemic era in 2020 and through 2022. We were beginning to see a normalization, but we don't have the 2023 data to look at in terms of how close we've gotten to the longer term trend. The appendix, again, has longer term details of the total and per capita fatalities over time in our region. But as a result, and primarily driven by that declining fertility rate, that the rate of growth of our population has slowed, and that's been accentuated in recent times by that net domestic migration in particular. When we look at other features, other characteristics of our demographics, the report's showing us that we're aging, and when we look at the difference in our median age from 2010 to 2020, we see we've had an increase of 6.3% in that median age, which is amongst one of the highest increases in that decade of any of the California Jobs First regions. We're still very low overall. We're still the third youngest region of the state, but we have this characteristic of increasing our median age, and importantly, without a doubt, the families with children are a massive characteristic of this region. The figure that we shared at one of the initial meetings, which showed those demographic trees, really, I think, dramatically showed the difference in terms of the youthfulness of our population compared to those of other regions around us. But it's important to keep in mind that is changing and evolving as we look going forward. And looking at details in terms of interregional median age comparisons and detailed population concentrations, they're available in the appendix. In the appendix as well. And I know I've been so excited to share this with you. You hopefully all have gotten the link to the report in the chat there. There should be a link, but if it's not, let us know and we'll repost that. There's also a QR code here at the end of my presentation where you can get that. Great, thanks, Jean. I see that you acknowledge that you've got it there. Another important characteristic of our population is shown as we look at these indications of demographic concentration, and that's just comparing the percentage of our population by these different age groups here in table 3.1.7 compared to the nation as a whole. So if we have a greater percentage than the percentage in the US as a whole, our ratio, this demographic concentration ratio, is greater than 1. If we have a smaller percentage than the nation as a whole, our ratio is less than 1. And that's where you see, in terms of our population 19 and under, that we have a 20%, give or take, higher share of population under 19 than the country as a whole. We have 1.23 concentration in 2022 in the 10 to 19-year-olds and a 1.21 concentration in the under 9-year-olds, which again is showing that we are still young despite some of our changes that the data shows. There's a lot of information in this section. I don't have time to go into it in detail, but it looks at the households with children, populations with disabilities, it looks at school enrollment, and this is quite interesting because in this regard, we see in the tables there that we're actually below the nation and the state in terms of our preschool and nursery school enrollment. And this is a potential indicator of a challenge that we have when we look at this population under 9 that's higher than the nation as a whole, but yet we're not at the same level of the nation in terms of preschool and nursery school enrollments, suggesting that, again, there is likely a challenge in terms of our access to those facilities and areas in this. And also, when we look at our college enrollments, even though we have a disproportionate portion of our population that are prime college age enrollees, we're well below the state and national rate. I'm off the top of my head, I don't have the file up in front of me, but I think we're about 20% in the North San Joaquin Valley, whereas statewide the percentage enrolled in college is about 30%. And we'll talk a little bit more about our educational attainment, but addressing and ensuring that access to higher education and further education opportunities seems to be clearly represented in this data as we look at it. We spoke previously about it in one of our webinars about some of the challenges that grandparents and single parent families face in this region. That data is in this section of the report, as well as in the appendix details around our veteran population and overall county level trends. The next portion of the report looks at inequalities, and we begin in that looking at income inequalities. A measure of inequality, which is often cited, is the Gini coefficient. If the Gini coefficient is 0, it means that everybody shares the income equally. If it's 1, it means that one person, one family, one unit holds all of the income in the region. In this regard, these measures that we have in our counties show relatively high inequality compared to a lot of other societies globally. But in terms of California and the nation, we're actually a little bit better off in terms of our equality. But that's, again, needs to be contextualized with the fact that we have relatively low income and we don't have a huge disparity as big as maybe some areas in the rest of the state. And that's reflected in this inequality distribution. Not to say that these Gini coefficients, these Gini indexes aren't large. And complementing that, we break down some of the distribution of income by the different divisions of households in the county. The lowest 20%, what this table is showing you in 3.1.18, is showing that the lowest 20% of households hold 3.4% of the income in Merced County, 3.8% of the income in Stanislaus County, and 3.4% of the income in San Joaquin County. And a measure which is often cited is looking at what percentage of the income does the highest 20% hold. And in Merced, the highest 20% of households by income hold 50%, account for 50% of the income, and Stanislaus 47.7, and in San Joaquin 48. And a measure complementing the Gini coefficient is to look at the ratio of the top 20% to the lowest 20%, the highest quintile to the lowest quintile. And that's showing that the highest quintile in Merced has 14.5 times the income of the lowest 20%. So despite the fact that our Gini coefficient might not be quote unquote that high, the reality of this difference is huge as we look at these incomes. And further details are also in the appendix, detailing those ratios and breaking down that top 20% into the very high in terms of the ratio between the top 20% and top 5%. Interestingly, we have details by county and census county divisions also. And the highest ratios in terms of those sub-county divisions seem to be seen in Merced, where you have some very wealthy households in communities of relatively low income.
And Dr. Pope, a
yeah.
question in the chat about how does this compare to the state's larger metro areas? Does that have
So
anything in the appendix?
Yeah, in terms of those larger metro areas, they are wealthier and they have more extreme wealth than we have. So in terms of that inequality, you will find in most of the larger metro areas higher measures of inequality. But it's not to say that we don't have really high inequality, but we're not unique, and our levels of inequality aren't distinct from those in other parts where those really wealthy households and really wealthy individuals in some of those other metro areas contribute to very high inequities as well. In that regard, we sort of have common cause with other regions on those measures. We also wanted to bring attention to the important role that government social programs play in a frontline to address some of the socioeconomic needs of our communities. And so we reported recent trends in social benefit receipts across the region. In the appendices, we have them broken down on per capita bases. And what, amongst other things, this shows is the very high role of unemployment, some of the other transfers and federal tax credits that occurred during the pandemic. You see here the unemployment insurance went from, in 2022 dollars, about 363 million to 4.8 billion between 2019 and 2020. And although those have come down now by 2022, it was an important component of what a lot of households depended on. The other transfer relief payments, those are programs like TANF, AFDC, WIC, childhood tax credits, and state tax credits, which were given out, where we see again a growth from several times the 2019 levels, and a return nearing pre-pandemic levels by 2022, which we expect to see further normalization in 2023. In that regard, I should also mention that when we look at this on a per capita basis compared to other parts of the states, other parts of the California, we see that we are higher on a per capita basis, which shows that these programs are working in terms of the targeting the higher needs that our community has and the populations. That's detailed in the appendix in the back as well. Poverty and self-sufficiency is another important story as we talk about the inequities in our region. And we give some data about the official poverty measure. And we show how we've had some relative improvement, but we also try to highlight that official poverty measure is a nationally derived indicator. And at a national level, it doesn't capture the cost of living challenges that we face. And this is a huge issue, and this is an important part of a lot of the work that was done in this baseline assessment. And we actually, to ensure some alignment with efforts which have been done already in Stanislaus County with STAN 2030, We enlisted the assistance and partnership of Brookings to delve into self-sufficiency, and we're pleased to have a lot of information through their analysis about self-sufficiency. And next week, I'll be talking about some of their analyses of what that means in terms of opportunity jobs and quality jobs in the region. But this week, I just wanted to share some of their findings at a very high level, which more are reported in the assessment. But importantly, to look at the report that Brookings has made available, this bit.ly link up here on the left gives details of that of that report where you can explore it, and I highly encourage you all to take a look at it. But wanted to explain that what they've looked at is a budget of what it takes to support a family, and a family of a variety of compositions. They've actually developed budgets for I think 24 different family structures, and each of those family have different costs. Do they have a child? Do they have an infant? Do they not have a child? Do they have a teenager? Is one parent working? Are both parents working? Multitudes of combinations of criteria which influence those costs of a family. And then look at housing costs, look at childcare costs. All those details are broken out in these budgets, which they being Brookings, built upon the University of Washington's self-sufficiency analysis. And for instance, I just showed over here on the left the difference between a family with one full-time worker compared to a family with one full-time worker and an infant. That budget estimate shows that the costs go from about $30,000 a year to over $69,000 a year as a result of the cost of that infant for that single parent employed. And there's a lot of interesting issues in this data that we could spend a lot of time on, but I would just highlight a couple of factors here that almost 45% of the North San Joaquin Valley population is not at this self-sufficient level of income in their households. They are dependent on state support or not in terms of addressing these needs that are their budgets. And also importantly, as we look at who is struggling, over 75% of families that are struggling have individuals involved in the workforce. They're either working or in the process of looking for work. So it's not a non-work story that's played out here in terms of these struggling families that are experiencing needs. There's details. I want to move along. There's still lots to cover, but please take a look at this information that Brookings has provided and that we built further analysis on. We'll be coming back to this next week, but there's a lot of really interesting details in the report, looking at the composition of struggling workers in the region and some of the characteristics in terms of age, education, race, ethnicity, and gender in particular. Another important dimension of inequalities are gender pay gaps, language justice, and communication inequality. And as we look at the population in our region, over 650,000 members of our region speak a language other than English. We give some details by county in the appendix. But also, it's important to note that over 250,000 have limited English in some extent, self-identified through our community surveys, and that could be problematic in terms of the accuracy of that. But at least as an estimate, we know that at least 250,000 people in our region have limited English access, and that's a huge need in terms of addressing it. There's also some important information about the different language compositions, which are in the appendices. And as we think about strategies for inclusive development, we hope that some of this information in the baseline assessment helps orient us to some of those needs as we look moving forward. Social mobility is a huge challenge. You know, are we able to move up to better income? Are we able to get better education? Are we able to avoid some of the criminal justice system? You know, or are we, because of our neighborhood, more likely to face incarceration? And we drew on a real wealth of information that is published by a project called the Opportunity Atlas to share some of that and to try to help make accessible some of the important dimensions that community plays in what happens in intergenerational in terms of a child compared to their parent, as well as intrageneration in terms of a person during their lifetime, and what opportunities they have for social advancement, quality of life. And as part of some of the information, they actually show how different income quartiles face different age expectancies, and we shared that in the base report. But again, there's a real huge amount of information available of different criteria and how those play out in these tables and in our expectancy of our population, depending on our gender, depending on our race and ethnicity, and the communities that we're from, and the income that our parents found themselves in when they moved to the area, if they moved here with us as well. The other important area in this, and this is mislabeled, apologies on this regard, it's actually looking at business ownership, and it's an inequity of business ownership, but we have details of the demographics of business ownership, looking at it by gender, looking at that by establishment size, employment size. In the appendix, we have county demographics, looking at the number of firms, number of employees, payrolls and payroll per employees across our counties, and how those differ by gender distribution, and trying to give us a foundation as we look for engaging businesses and some of the businesses that maybe we need to target more than others. What are key characteristics? Some information on that is included in also in section 3.1.2, talking about inequities. I'm going to pause just for a quick second to have a drink here, and then I'm going to walk us through briefly the structure and dynamics section, and then I will pause to let you all ask me what I'm sure must be a whole bunch of questions about what we've got and what we've walked through.
And yeah, everybody, we've got about 5 more minutes of Dr. Pogue's presentation, and that'll leave us about 10 minutes for Q&A. So make your notes so we can have a little bit of discussion at the end.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah. We've details on the composition of the value addition, the gross regional product in our region, which in 2022, the last year that data was available, totaled $79.9 billion. We've also looked at trends in that. This figure 1.1.21 looks at the trends in terms of the level, but also the rate of growth over time, where some of the impacts of the pandemic hit, and some of those changes, as well as forecasts of that change over time. An example, we also have details of trade flows, which are important indicators of our economic connectedness in our market areas. This is showing the significance of our intrastate connectedness, with Santa Clara, Sacramento, and Alameda being our top trading partners. 7 counties are larger than the largest state that our trading partner, which is Texas. Nevada and Florida following Texas as the second and third largest trading partner. And we have details in terms of what sectors are those exports in. Details in terms of infrastructure. And in this context, we wanted to highlight one of the challenges and opportunities, a sort of dual nature of our region, in that we are, compared to other California regions, one of the least expensive regions. This is table 3.1.29 is a business cost index, which shows that compared to a lot of our neighboring metros, we're a lower cost in total by labor and real estate. But it's important to recognize that this is a ranking of over 300 metros nationally, and all of our metros in this region are in the top 50 of the nation. So we're in California. We're relatively low cost in California, but California does have its high cost operations. So thinking about that as we think about some of these strategies moving forward. And as we look at the growth, which we're going to be talking about more next week, thinking about how our transportation and warehousing infrastructure in particular has led to strong growth, which has been incredibly benefiting from the e-commerce growth, but how after the pandemic that's also reverted to sort of previous pandemic trend levels. Also have a lot of information in the baseline assessment report about housing needs and the high level of housing needs that we have in our region, and how, despite this need, some of the slow development of housing in our region, and one of the key issues that we have in terms of how do we house our population and deal with those costs of living challenges that our population faces. And I just might mention that one indicator of that is looking at the median price in our region compared to neighboring regions. And I recently looked at the difference between San Joaquin County and Alameda County. And during the pandemic, that median housing cost difference for a single family home reached over $900,000 difference between the median home in Alameda County and the median home in San Joaquin County. It's come off of that slightly, but it's still a huge cost difference. And we have some of that data also in the report, showing our inter-regional attractiveness and some of that migration dynamics. Briefly, since we're running out of time, we have lots of information about what's been happening with our real personal income. We've seen an improvement. An important story that needs a lot more time than we have today is this net adjustment for residents and those inflows of income from other regions, which have been tied to our growing commute patterns, which we have some data here on at the end. It's a really important component. The net inflows, or the inflows of income are 23% of all earnings that have been paid by employers in the county now, those inflows from people outside of the region. We have details on our labor force as well, looking at how we're again near historically low unemployment rate levels, and some interest, although we had post-pandemic some growth in our labor force participation, potentially some slowdown in that labor force participation again. Our commute dynamics, there's important questions as we look at remote work and hybrid work models in terms of what these post-pandemic patterns will return to. And we've got some analyses already ongoing that we're going to be augmenting the baseline assessment report to look at some of that information. But we captured at least a high level indication in the assessment report. Human capital, looking at that concentration, which is looking at these shares compared to the nation, we see that unfortunately, as we move to higher levels of qualifications, we become lower relative in terms of our attainment compared to the rest of the nation. We're very high, unfortunately, in the proportion of our population with a 9th grade or less educational attainment. and looking at that as again, another key dimension of some of our challenges and needs that we face as we look at transforming our regional economy and the value and opportunity jobs in our region. And detailing the educational institutions, what's been happening with their completions. We also have details of the level of completions reported. The public institutions and University of the Pacific and Humphreys have been the key producers of qualifications in our region for a long time now, and they continue to play an important role. And again, why it's really great that we've got all of these institutions working together on this research collaborative. And finally, just wrapping up this very fast overview, we acknowledge that the amenities of our region are important dimensions. And as we look at that using the SMU Arts Vibrancy Index, we see that we do face another challenge here in terms of some of those amenities that our region has. And I am going to stop there, and I'm happy to come back and talk about any or all of those slides, but would be very happy to hear from you all, any questions you have or any other issues that I can talk about in terms of this part of the report and what we've done in terms of the information that the team's compiled around the region and the baseline assessment.
There were a couple from the chat comments I can read to you.
Okay.
One was about the metro areas that you were discussing earlier. And the question was, were those metro areas better off than our bottom 25%?
In terms of the income inequalities, is that what we were talking about?
Yes.
So in terms of self-sufficiency, the challenge that a lot of the quote unquote richer metros have is a high cost of living. And so that's where looking at some of the University of Washington self-sufficiency budgets are very helpful. In terms of the needs and the challenges that our region faces, we have a large percentage of our population. In terms of absolute numbers, some of those large metros probably have as many or more, but they're in a different context because they have more resources than we have to address some of those inequities. Whereas in terms of our foundation for resources, we're more limited, and we have, which we'll talk about next week, in terms of our employment base and our key employers, we have less lead employers with high levels of knowledge jobs to work for some of the higher value pathways that could maybe address some of those inequities.
Great. And the second one was asking about migration patterns from San Joaquin to out of state. Was there an assessment done on the political climate in California versus other states? Maybe that aligns with taxes and costs of living.
Definitely, and I mean that is certainly an issue which a lot of analysis could be given to. What are the factors that are leading to those? We didn't have scope in this assessment to go into those, but I would certainly, if I was going to be looking at why, want to get into some of that information and use some of that to frame it in terms of where are people coming from and going to. We drew on a variety of data, including U.S. postal data, in terms of change of address data and IRS filing data to look where people were moving from and to. It's important to note that a lot of the places where some of the initial migration went to are dealing with the same challenges in terms of high costs of living as new migrants move in. And they're dealing almost the same sort of story that we have for a long time dealt with high income immigrants from other regions. other states are now dealing with that same story as people from our region and other parts of California are relocating there.
I have a question, Dr. Pogue. I know that a lot of this is about sort of the region in aggregate, and you did give us some stats on the different counties. I'm wondering in general if you looking at all the data, if one of the three counties seems to be struggling more than the other two, if one is experiencing more economic growth than the other two, just as you kind of look at our region as a balance, is one of us an outlier?
So I'll save the economic growth conversation for next week, but in terms of, you know, the composition of challenges, we have similar stories, but they're distinct in that when you look at, say, Merced has a lot of low-income households, and particularly as a percentage of the population. But when you look at that in terms of total numbers, those numbers are actually a little bit smaller than the number in San Joaquin County because of San Joaquin County's size. So as a proportion, as a relative story, Merced is definitely the most impoverished if we look at it as a percentage of its entire population. But if we look at it in terms of numbers of families, of individuals, we have, unfortunately, equity or reasonably close to equity. The cause of that poverty is different. It seems to be different as we start getting into some of the details, but those challenges in terms of meeting self-sufficiency are pretty similar in total numbers. But as shares go, we definitely know that Merced County is disproportionately lower income, and also some of the stories about language, right? We find that San Joaquin County has a larger Asian population, and some of those issues in terms of access to language, there's a greater Asian language challenge in San Joaquin County than we have down in Merced County, and Stanislaus County is somewhere in between. And so there is a much larger concentration of Hispanic individuals in Merced County than there are in San Joaquin County, but in total, those populations are larger in San Joaquin County because of the size of the county. But as shares go, you see a greater diversity of some other populations in San Joaquin County, and sort of an intermediary in Stanislaus with that diversity.
It's great. So we're just about time. I want to thank everybody, but before we let you go, Dr. Pogue, if you could just do a little promotional hit for sort of our next two sessions and what you'll cover, and then we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Absolutely. So next week, we'll be looking at the growth clusters, taking some of that analysis that Brookings did and applying it to look at where the higher paying jobs are, where the more self-sufficiency and opportunities to self-sufficiency is in our economy, and looking at some of the growth dynamics between the counties in terms of where industries have been growing and where they haven't. And following on that, we'll be taking a very important conversation in the 15th of February, looking at some of the key environmental and health challenges that our region's facing, and closing out that conversation with a discussion of some of the key economic and socioeconomic opportunities that the baseline assessments lifted up through its analysis, and looking forward to chatting with you all on those, and hopefully having a little bit more time for further discussion in the next couple of sessions.
Thank you, everybody. The information's up on the website, so you can link that. There's also some links there in the chat, but you can let your friends know that the recording will be up on the website and the report's already there. Okay, thank you, everybody.